The galaxy had been quiet for centuries, a calm so deep it felt unnatural. The war that once raged between alien empires had long been forgotten. Peace had taken root, and humanity, after their victory over the galaxy's most terrifying forces, had settled into their place among the stars. But that peace was about to shatter, and no one saw it coming. It all started with a strange signal, the first hint of something wrong, a faint ripple through the quiet void of space. At first it was dismissed, a glitch, a random anomaly, nothing worth worrying about. But as the signal grew stronger, the silence of the galaxy was disturbed. Captain Sarah Hale of the starship Falcon was the first to notice the irregularity. She sat in the bridge, eyes glued to the screens as the low hum of the ship filled the room. The crew had been busy, maintaining their usual routine, but Sarah felt something gnawing at the edge of her consciousness. "Captain, the signal's coming through again," Lieutenant Mason called out from his station. Sarah nodded, her fingers tracing the cool metal of the console. "Put it on the screen." The words appeared slowly, garbled and broken at first, but they became clear with each passing second. "The enemy returns. Prepare yourselves." A cold chill ran through Sarah as she read the words. The signal had been traced to a distant part of the galaxy, far from any known human territory. But that wasn't the part that bothered her. It was the tone, the warning, urgent and final. "The enemy returns." It was a phrase that hadn't been spoken in over 200 years, not since the defeat of the Zorath, the ruthless alien race that once threatened to wipe out all life. After their defeat, peace had reigned. But this message made it clear they weren't the only ones in the galaxy anymore. Something had been waiting, lurking in the dark corners of space. "Do we know where it's coming from?" Sarah asked, turning toward her crew. "We're working on it, Captain," Lieutenant Mason responded. "But the signal, it's strange. It's not like anything we've ever encountered before." Sarah's mind raced. The last war had left deep scars. A war fought with unimaginable power, weapons so advanced that they nearly obliterated entire worlds. To hear these words now, after so many years of peace, was unsettling. The galaxy wasn't prepared for war. It had moved on. It had forgotten how to fight. She needed to know more. She needed to understand the threat. "Start a full scan of the area," Sarah ordered, her voice steady despite the unease crawling up her spine. "And I want to know where that signal is coming from." Her crew moved quickly, but Sarah knew the situation was urgent. They had to be prepared. They could not afford to be caught off guard again. Hours passed, each minute heavier than the last. The Falcon drifted through the black void, waiting for more answers. As the crew worked, Sarah paced the bridge, her mind constantly replaying the message. She tried to focus on the practical details, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the same question. Who was out there? The galaxy had been silent for so long. Could it really be an enemy? Could humanity be dragged back into the horrors of war? Then the console pinged again, breaking through Sarah's thoughts. The screen lit up with a new set of coordinates. "It's coming from the edge of the Zorath Expanse," Lieutenant Mason announced. The Zorath Expanse was a place no one dared to enter, a vast area of space filled with debris and old battlegrounds. Once a thriving center of Zorath power, it had become a graveyard of ships and stations abandoned after the war. The idea that something could be hiding there was chilling. "Set a course," Sarah ordered, her voice colder than she intended. She had no idea what awaited them, but she couldn't sit idle, not when the fate of the galaxy might be at stake. As the Falcon turned toward the dark edge of the expanse, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The quiet of space pressed in around them, as if even the stars held their breath. She stared into the darkness, feeling the weight of a galaxy that had long forgotten the horrors of war. The warning had come, and now there was no turning back. In the depths of the expanse, something waited. Something that was about to remind the galaxy why peace had always been a fragile thing. The Falcon entered the unknown. Silence filled the ship once again. But this time it was different. This silence wasn't peaceful. It was ominous. And as Sarah watched the stars slowly disappear behind them, she knew. They weren't just heading into the darkness, they were walking straight into the heart of an ancient nightmare. The war was returning. And this time, humanity would not be ready. The Falcon moved deeper into the Zorath Expanse, the vast and uncharted region where light seemed to fade, swallowed by the emptiness. The silence of space grew heavier with each passing moment. The crew, once full of conversation and laughter, now moved in hushed, careful steps, their eyes constantly scanning the unknown. No one spoke of it, but everyone felt it, a palpable sense of dread. Captain Sarah Hale stood at the command console, her eyes focused on the drifting stars ahead. The coordinates Mason had uncovered pointed to a hidden anomaly, an area that shouldn't exist on any star map. It was a blind spot, a void that even the Zorath themselves had ignored, yet that was where the signal had led them. The message, "The enemy returns," echoed in Sarah's mind. "Captain," Lieutenant Mason called out from his station, his voice tense. "We've lost contact with the other ships. Communication systems are down." A shiver ran through Sarah's spine. It was the same pattern they'd encountered earlier, when the first message came through. Systems failing, communications severed, as though something was actively blocking their presence. Something that didn't want them to know the truth. "Any signs of the enemy?" Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the unease gnawing at her. "Nothing. Just this emptiness," Mason replied. His fingers hovered over the console, but he couldn't bring himself to make a move. "It's like we're being watched, but by nothing." The crew fell silent. The ship's engines hummed, but it was as if the stars around them refused to light up. It was the sort of eerie quiet that made every creak of the ship sound like a warning. "Scan the area again. I want to know what's causing this interference," Sarah ordered. The Falcon was only moments away from the coordinates, the void looming ahead. A flicker of doubt crossed Sarah's mind. Could they really be walking into a trap, led by an enemy that had stayed hidden all this time? Suddenly, the ship jolted. It was slight, barely noticeable, but it was enough to send a ripple of alarm through the crew. A low mechanical hum echoed through the halls. Sarah's eyes darted to the communications panel, but it was still down. The sensors blinked erratically as if they were picking up something. But what? The system couldn't tell. "Captain," Mason shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "Something is coming at us." The lights in the bridge flickered, plunging them into darkness. For a few brief seconds, it felt like the ship itself had disappeared from the universe. Then the emergency lights kicked in, casting a dim red glow over the crew's tense faces. "Status," Sarah barked, her mind racing. She needed answers, and fast. The display flickered again, showing a mass of blackness expanding rapidly towards them. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't anything that Sarah could recognize. The images on the screen warped, twisted like a grotesque shadow reaching for them from beyond the fabric of space. "We're being surrounded," Mason said, his voice barely a whisper. The Falcon was in the center of a growing storm of darkness with no visible enemy ships to fight. Sarah watched as the black mass consumed the viewports, leaving only an endless, terrifying void. The darkness was different, alive. She could feel it in her bones. A presence that wasn't just mechanical, but something else. "We need to move," shouted Ensign Roberts, gripping the controls. "If we stay here, we'll be pulled in." "Stay calm," Sarah said, gripping the edge of the console, trying to hold herself steady. She couldn't let fear take control. "Get us out of here now." Roberts tried to engage the thrusters, but the ship didn't respond. The power systems flickered, and for a brief moment the Falcon seemed to hang motionless in the heart of the dark mass. The hum of the engines died, replaced by a deafening silence that settled over them like a heavy blanket. The crew stared at the viewports, breathless. The vast darkness was nearly complete, with only the faintest outline of their ship visible. And then from the shadows something moved, something vast and formless but unmistakably present. It was the enemy, the one they couldn't see but could feel creeping toward them. "We have to fight back," shouted Lieutenant Mason, his hand hovering over the weapons console. But there was no target, nothing to lock onto. The enemy wasn't visible, not in any conventional way. Sarah's mind raced. This was no ordinary attack. The enemy had no ships, no weapons, they didn't need them. The very fabric of space seemed to bend around them, warping reality in ways she couldn't comprehend. "Shut down all non-essential systems," Sarah commanded. "Power down the engines and weapons. Let's go dark." The crew followed her orders immediately. The ship fell silent, its lights dimming as they entered a state of near-complete stillness. The idea was to hide, to become part of the dark void and avoid detection. If there was one thing she knew, it was that they couldn't fight what they couldn't see. Minutes passed in the suffocating darkness. The eerie quiet seemed to stretch into infinity. Sarah's mind whirled, trying to piece together what was happening. She had faced battles before, but this, This was different. And then, without warning, a voice broke the silence. It was faint at first, like the whisper of a breeze, but it quickly grew louder. The voice wasn't from any of the crew. It wasn't even human. "You cannot hide from us," the voice hissed. Its tone filled with malice and power. The message was clear. They had been found. The Falcon shook violently as the dark mass enveloped them entirely. The stars outside were gone, replaced by an oppressive blackness. And as the voice echoed one last time, Sarah realized they were no longer just fighting an enemy. They were battling an ancient, unseen force that had awakened from its long slumber. The war had truly begun. The silence in the Falcon was deafening. The eerie blackness that had swallowed the ship was almost suffocating. For hours there had been no movement, no signs of life outside the ship. The crew was on edge, their eyes constantly darting to the darkened viewports, expecting the unknown to strike at any moment. But the stars were gone. There was only the void. Captain Sarah Hale stood at the command console, her mind racing with the unknowns. The voice they had heard, cold, menacing, and powerful, still echoed in her thoughts. "You cannot hide from us." The words were a warning, but they also felt like a promise of something worse to come. She forced herself to focus, pushing her fear aside. "Report," Sarah ordered, her voice steady despite the rising panic that threatened to break through. Mason, still at his station, was shaking his head. "I've tried everything, Captain. The comms are down. Nothing's getting through. It's like we're in a different dimension or something." The thought sent a chill down Sarah's spine. Had they entered some kind of trap? An invisible zone where their technology could no longer function? If that were the case, they were sitting ducks, helpless and exposed. "What about the weapons?" she asked, trying to force logic into the situation. "Weapons are offline, Captain. The systems are locked. We can't activate anything." "Activate emergency power," Sarah commanded. "Get the shields online at least." "Aye, Captain," Roberts responded. His fingers flew over the controls, but it was like fighting a ghost. Every attempt to bring power back to life was met with failure. "What in the galaxy is happening?" Sarah muttered under her breath. The crew stood frozen, waiting for any sign that they could fight back. Every sound on the ship felt amplified in the quiet darkness. The once comforting hum of the engines now felt ominous, like the last heartbeat before death. Suddenly the Falcon jerked again. This time it wasn't a subtle movement. The entire ship shuddered violently, as though something massive had just collided with them. The lights flickered and then went out entirely. For a moment, everything was pitch black. Then the emergency lights flared back on, casting a sickly red glow throughout the ship. "Damage report," Sarah shouted, gripping the armrest of her chair. "We're taking hull damage, Captain." Lieutenant Mason's voice was sharp. "It's not a collision. Something's pushing us." "We can't move!" A sick realization dawned on Sarah. Whatever the enemy was, it wasn't just a physical force. It was manipulating the ship's very systems, pulling them in, pushing them further into the darkness. They weren't just fighting an army. They were fighting an invisible force with powers beyond their understanding. "Stay calm," Sarah ordered, trying to keep control of the situation. "Everyone to your stations. We need to keep our wits about us." Minutes passed in tense silence. The crew worked frantically, but it was clear that whatever they faced, it wasn't something that could be beaten with technology or weapons. There had to be another way. Sarah's mind raced, searching for a solution that didn't seem to exist. Just then, a strange noise filled the air. It was low, almost like a growl, and it seemed to come from all directions. The walls of the Falcon seemed to vibrate in response to the sound, as if the ship itself was reacting to the presence of the enemy. "What was that?" Roberts asked, his voice trembling. "I don't know," Sarah replied, her eyes narrowing. The noise grew louder, but it wasn't just a sound. It was a feeling like something was crawling under their skin, burrowing into their very souls. "Captain," Mason shouted, his face pale. "I'm seeing movement on the external sensors. It's not a ship. Before he could finish, the lights in the command center blinked out again. But this time, when they returned, there was something new in the viewports. A shape. Massive and formless, it hovered just beyond the Falcon. A dark, shadowy presence that seemed to swallow the light around it. No windows, no hull, no markings. Just pure, suffocating darkness. "It's here," Sarah whispered, her heart pounding in her chest. "It's not a fleet. It's not an army. It's something else." The crew stared at the shape, frozen. Their minds couldn't fully comprehend what they were seeing. It wasn't just a ship. It was like a living entity, its edges constantly shifting and warping, as though it was not bound by the laws of physics. There were no weapons, no engines visible. It was just darkness moving with purpose. Sarah felt a wave of dread wash over her. They were not meant to face this, not yet. The peace they had known, the peace they had fought for, was slipping through their fingers. The enemy was not just waiting to strike. It had already begun. The shape outside the Falcon grew larger, its form stretching, expanding until it seemed to fill the entire viewport. And then from within the darkness, a flash of light. A single beam shot out from the mass, striking the Falcon with such force that the ship's hull groaned under the pressure. "We're being pulled in," Mason screamed, his hands desperately slamming on the controls. "The force is too strong." The Falcon trembled again, its systems failing faster now as the mysterious force dragged them closer to the dark mass. No power, no weapons, no escape. It was all slipping away and the crew had no way to fight back. The ship lurched forward and Sarah could feel the weight of their inevitable fate pressing in. This wasn't just a battle for survival anymore. This was a fight against something older, something beyond the stars, something that had awoken from a long slumber, and now it was hungry for humanity's destruction. The war had indeed awakened, and humanity was caught in the middle of it, unprepared and vulnerable. The ship was silent now, eerily so. The Falcon drifted helplessly, trapped in the clutches of a dark force. The crew had done everything they could, and yet the mysterious presence outside their ship had only grown stronger. The massive shape, an amorphous mass of shadow, continued to grow, its tendrils of darkness creeping closer as though it were alive, watching, waiting. Captain Sarah Hale stood at the front of the bridge, her eyes fixed on the viewport. The once bustling command center had fallen into an unnatural quiet. The lights flickered intermittently, casting long, distorted shadows on the walls, making the crew appear like phantoms of their former selves. "Captain?" Lieutenant Mason's voice broke the stillness, but even it seemed to fade into the room. "We've lost all power. I can't bring the engines back online. The gravity wells outside are pulling us further into the darkness. It's as if it knows we're trying to escape." Sarah didn't answer immediately. She was trying to piece together the situation, but there was nothing she could do. The power, the communications, the weapons, everything was at the mercy of this unseen enemy. They had become nothing more than puppets in its hands. The realization was unbearable. "Have you tried rerouting power through the auxiliary circuits?" Sarah finally asked, her voice sounding hollow even to her own ears. "Already done, Captain. It's not working. We're completely at its mercy." The chilling truth settled over them like a heavy fog. It wasn't just that they were stuck. It was that the enemy wasn't here to fight, it was here to suffocate them. "Where is it coming from?" Sarah asked, her gaze flicking to the starless void outside. "What is it? How can it be so all-encompassing?" "It's not a ship," Mason said, his voice quieter now, as if speaking any louder would awaken something even worse. "It's like a living entity. The darkness, it's not just a physical thing. It's something that bends reality. We can't see it, but we can feel it. And it feels like it's breathing." The walls of the bridge seemed to echo his words. The crew shifted nervously, their eyes darting toward the viewport as though afraid that even glancing at the darkness would invite their doom. For a long moment, the silence persisted. Then a soft vibration hummed through the ship. It wasn't the usual noise of machinery or power surging through the system. It was something else. A low, persistent hum that seemed to come from the very walls of the ship. Is that coming from the ship?" Sarah asked, turning toward Mason. "No, it's coming from outside," Mason replied, eyes wide with a dawning realization. "It's resonating with us. It's calling us." Before anyone could respond, the comm system crackled to life with an unexpected sound. Voices, indistinct and alien, speaking in unison. The words were incomprehensible, but the tone was unmistakable. It was not a warning. It was an invitation. "We need to get out of here, Captain. We can't stay any longer. If it's calling us." "It's not a call for help," Sarah interrupted. Her heart raced in her chest as the implications of Mason's words took root. "It's an invitation to join them. It's drawing us in, so it can consume us." The bridge was still. The crew stared at Sarah, their eyes filled with horror. They had been in worse situations, fought tougher enemies. But this, the sheer weight of the unknown, the impossibility of their situation, was unlike anything they had ever faced. Suddenly, the viewports flickered and a shape materialized in the distance. It was not the massive dark mass they had seen earlier, but something more tangible, more defined. It was a ship, though not one of any kind they had ever seen before. The contours of its hull twisted and undulated as if the very ship was alive. Its surface shimmered with an unnatural glow, a sickly green light that seemed to pulse in time with the hum outside. The crew recoiled as they saw the ship approach, but there was no time to react. A powerful force, invisible yet palpable, slammed against the Falcon with such force that the entire ship groaned under the pressure. "Shields?" Sarah asked, even though she already knew the answer. "Offline," Mason said, his voice barely audible. "We're powerless." The alien ship's massive hull loomed closer, its shape warping the very fabric of space around it. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she realized there was no escape. No weapon could harm it. No technology could fight it. The ship, the enemy, was part of the darkness, and the darkness was part of them. And then the voice returned. It was not the disembodied whisper they had heard before, but something deeper, more powerful. It was like a voice in their minds, a call that bypassed the physical world altogether. "You are weak. You cannot resist. You will be consumed as all others before you." Sarah's heart pounded, but she refused to show fear. She couldn't, not now. Not when the fate of the crew and possibly humanity was in her hands. "Shut it down," she ordered, turning to the crew. "Every system, every device go dark. No lights, no energy." The crew scrambled to follow her commands, and the ship fell into complete darkness. The artificial hums ceased and the voice in their minds quieted, leaving only the terrible presence of the enemy outside. For a moment, the Falcon was nothing but a shadow in the dark, surrounded by the vast emptiness of the unknown. But the silence didn't last. A flash of light, a sickly green beam, slammed into the ship, rattling its very core. "We can't hold much longer," Roberts shouted, his voice strained with fear. Sarah stood motionless, watching the alien vessel draw closer. The crew was ready to fight, but what could they fight with? The darkness outside wasn't just an enemy. It was a force of nature, and soon, it would consume them all. The stars outside were fading, swallowed by the dark, as the Falcon drifted helplessly into the heart of the void. There was no escape. The enemy had come, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The Falcon was falling apart. Sarah Hale could feel the weight of it in the pit of her stomach, a crushing sense of inevitability that pressed down on her every breath. The ship had become little more than a shell, battered and broken, drifting aimlessly in the cold, suffocating void. Outside, the alien vessel loomed, a dark and twisted monstrosity that defied all logic. Its pulsating green light filled the viewports, casting long, eerie shadows across the wreckage of their once proud starship. "Captain," Mason said quietly, his voice barely audible over the hum of the failing systems, "it's over. We're not getting out of this." Sarah turned to face him. His eyes were wide with fear, but she saw something more, something she recognized from her own heart. It wasn't just fear, it was resignation. They had fought as hard as they could. But now, with their weapons down and their systems offline, there was nothing left to fight with. "I'm not giving up," Sarah said firmly, though the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. "We're human. We don't just die quietly." Mason didn't respond. There was no argument left in him. He simply stood there, hands trembling at his console, knowing that this battle was far beyond their capability. For a moment, the crew stood in silence as if waiting for a sign, some miraculous turn of fate that would save them, but no miracle came. Only the steady thrum of the alien vessel's presence outside. The darkness pressed in around them, more oppressive with every passing second. Then, as though on cue, the voice returned. It wasn't a whisper anymore, it was louder, sharper. The air itself seemed to tremble with its power. "You are nothing," the voice boomed. "You cannot defeat what is already conquered. Surrender now and you may be spared. Resist and you will become one with the void." Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. The words were a taunt, a challenge, and yet the finality in the voice made her blood run cold. The darkness outside was patient, waiting, like a predator savoring the moment before the kill. But as she stood there, Sarah felt something stir inside her, a tiny flicker of defiance. She wasn't ready to let the Falcon fall. Not yet, not when there was still hope, however faint. "Do we have any way to fight back?" Sarah asked, turning to the crew. We're powerless, Captain, Mason said, his voice hoarse. There's nothing we can do. The ship's systems they're too far gone. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Sarah's gaze lingered on the viewports where the alien vessel stretched before them. A vast and incomprehensible entity. The green light pulsed again like the heartbeat of some ancient creature. Suddenly, a realization hit Sarah like a slap to the face. Wait, she said, eyes widening. Mason, what if the ship's power core is still intact? What if we can use it? What do you mean? Mason asked, looking at her, a spark of curiosity in his eyes. We have no weapons. We have no shields. But if we can overload the core, we might be able to send a burst of energy strong enough to damage that thing outside. The words felt ridiculous even to Sarah. The idea of using their power core as a weapon, especially when their entire ship was on the brink of collapse, seemed insane. But it was the only thing left to try. Can it work? Mason asked, a faint hint of hope creeping into his voice. It's our last shot, Sarah said, but we have to do it quickly. I don't know how long we'll be able to keep the core stable once we begin the process. Without waiting for a response, she rushed to the engineering station, her mind working in overdrive. She had no choice but to take the risk. She couldn't just sit there and wait for the inevitable. The crew needed something to believe in, and if nothing else, she would give them that. One last chance. Mason, Sarah called. I need you to initiate a manual override of the core systems. I'll prep the surge circuits. Got it, Captain, Mason said, his voice suddenly more focused. The tension in the room was palpable, and Sarah could feel it pressing down on her thick as the darkness outside. This was it. There would be no second chance. As Mason worked to engage the override, Sarah turned to the others. They were all silent now, but their eyes were fixed on her, waiting for her command. Prepare for the overload, Sarah ordered, her voice steady. We have one shot at this. Once we start the process, there's no turning back. Minutes passed as they scrambled to engage the systems. Sarah could hear the ship groaning under the strain, the hull creaking as the power core hummed to life. Every second felt like an eternity, but finally the readouts on her console lit up, signaling that the overload sequence had begun. The alien vessel outside didn't move. It seemed to be watching them, waiting. Its green light pulsed again, but there was no change. The silence remained. Then, with a sudden surge, the ship's power systems began to hum louder, the intensity building. The Falcon shook violently, its walls groaning under the stress. The ship was fighting back, but it wasn't enough. They needed more power, more energy to push against the alien force. Captain, it's not enough, Mason shouted, panic creeping into his voice. The core's going critical. We need more time. Sarah didn't hesitate. Give it everything we've got, now. With a final, desperate push, Mason slammed his hand down on the console, activating the last phase of the overload. A blinding flash of light erupted from the core, filling the bridge with a searing glow. And then, the ship went completely still. The lights flickered and died. The hum of the Falcon stopped. The air was thick with silence. The crew stared at the viewport, barely breathing, waiting to see if their gamble had paid off. Outside, the alien vessel flickered. It was weakening. But would it be enough to stop the enemy? Would it be enough to save them all? The war had come, and humanity's final stand was in motion.